Welcome everyone. We'll just wait for a few minutes for people to join and we'll get started. Okay, in the interest of time, I might just get started. So hello everybody and welcome to today's session. What's the big deal about the good things of life? I'm Rhiannon Brodie, Chairperson of Foundations Forum. This is the last session of the 3 webinars that we've been hosting with accredited teacher of SRV John Armstrong. So welcome if you've joined for all of these today or if you're new. So before we begin, I'd first of all just like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, wherever that may be for you. For me, here in Sydney, it is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and it is upon their ancestral lands that we are all present as we share our own knowledge, teaching, learning and experiences. May we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. So welcome, as I said, wherever you may have joined us today. I'm also here joined today by our new project coordinator, Rosita Suna, who has been the key driver of organising and planning for these webinars. And I'll just get Rosita to come on and say hello.
Hi everyone, welcome. Really happy you joined us again for our last webinar. I also would like to take the opportunity to thank you for your positive feedback. That has been very encouraging, and we are looking forward to seeing you at our face-to-face workshop next year in February. Don't forget to share our events on your social channels and networks, and I wish you a wonderful festive season and a great start in 2021. Back to Rhiannon and John. Bye.
Thanks, Rosita. Before we start the session, and apologies if you've heard this before, but some of people have never really heard about, if this is your first time, who Foundations Forum is. We're a New South Wales non-profit volunteer organisation formed in 1985 by a group of individuals that were committed to improving the lives of people who are marginalised in our society. Our aim is to challenge, inspire and encourage individuals and organisations to pursue better lives for people who are at risk of being devalued by promoting the principles and practices of social role valorisation. We aim to assist people to understand social devaluation and disadvantage in our community, especially as it affects the lives of people who are marginalised. So our emphasis is on organising and conducting workshops and training events designed to create a deeper awareness of the circumstances of people, as well as offering positive strategies for creating the conditions which are more likely to lead to a better life for those people. Due to COVID this year, we've not been able to host any face-to-face workshops, so we're really excited that we've been able to bring together these webinars and offer these shorter learning opportunities. But we are very excited to announce that John Armstrong has joined us to present these webinars for us, but he'll be joining us next year in early February 2021 to deliver face-to-face workshops in Sydney. And John's going to be talking more about this towards the end of today's session. We are keen to continue to connect with you and look forward to keeping in touch with you via regular updates and upcoming workshops and events. A recorded version of this webinar will be available, but we'll also be emailing you that link with some additional resources and links to our website. Webinar 1 and 2, we are looking at getting that online via our YouTube video channel in the next day or so, and we'll be letting people know that, and you'll be feel free to share that amongst your networks. We have 2 polls at the beginning and the end of the webinar, and a short survey will be available at the end. We appreciate your input, and your feedback is important. Our survey is anonymous, and your answers though will help us in many ways, you know, to ensure that we're improving the types of information and webinars and workshops and resources, but also how we can support you as well in your journey about understanding SRV and any other information you are after. Just a note too that today's webinar is part of our Pursuing Ordinary Lives Through Valued Roles project, which has been funded by the Department of Social Services through an information linkage and capacity building grant. You have an opportunity throughout the session to ask questions, and I ask you to do that through the question and answer at the bottom. You should be able to see that you can type in a question, and towards the end, we'll be able to provide a summary of them to John for him to be able to answer. Any issues with sound or any other questions you might queries, please use the chat as well. And we'll be reviewing that throughout the session. For best viewing of this webinar, please select Speaker View in the viewing icon located on the top right corner. So now I'd like to introduce John Armstrong, a long-time friend and supporter of Foundations Forum for many years. John has had a long career in many human service roles, the last 30 as a human service consultant, evaluator and trainer to people, families and organisations across Australia, New Zealand and other parts of the world. His work is underpinned by the knowledge and application of social role valorisation, which provides the practice framework for successfully transforming the lives of people who are or at risk of being devalued by their communities. So over to you, John. Actually, before I begin, I always forget this, don't I? We'll start our first poll, if that's okay. If Rosita, you don't mind bringing up the first poll to begin. So the first question in our poll today, and you just have to click yes or no, is the concept of the good things of life important in your support efforts? Okay, and we might just, we might just share those results now. And yes, we've had 100%, of course. So over to you, John.
That's great, Rhiannon. Thank you. And hi, everyone. Great to see you on board today for our third and final session. And if you have missed the previous ones, do be sure to catch them. They're linked together, these topics, and you'll get a nice progression as we go through these kind of topics. Nice to see 100% for the good things of life. And so that's what we want to talk about today, because such a concept helps us understand the purpose of what it is we're trying to achieve, whether it's in the life of an individual person or a whole class of people. Purpose is central to what we do, and yet we can find ourselves sometimes working at cross purposes and without sufficient purpose in regard to the efforts that we are making. And there are many goals. You might say purpose provides that sense of direction, that reason for going in a certain direction. And over time, we found that many goals have lovely statements, but they don't always deliver the kind of results that we were after. They act as a proxy, a facade perhaps, that represents an idea but fails to achieve it. Back in their 70s and 80s, it was very common, for instance, for many agencies to claim that they were helping people to achieve their maximum potential. The problem was the agency didn't believe the people they supported had much potential. So while the rhetoric was flourishing and very positive, nothing much happened to the people's lives to bring that about. Another kind of goal we hear about, a sense of purpose and direction, is for someone to be made happy, is that their life be happy. This is a very nebulous kind of feature. And the problem with it, of course, is that anything then that might challenge or put the person under any pressure or produce any anxiety then might be avoided. But of course, we know too that in order to grow and develop, we need to be able to face some challenges, to do things we've never done before, which sometimes makes us a little bit unhappy, though we might then feel fulfilled having then obtained that final result. And then a tremendous sense of satisfaction can occur. But happiness as a goal is really fleeting and may cause us to avoid the growth in a human being. And of course, everybody needs to grow and develop. And if we stop growing, it's like we're dead already. So happiness is a very poor goal to select for people. Another common problem with selecting a goal is that we end up selecting the method for achieving a goal. For instance, people might say their goal is to get NDIS funding, or to get certain therapy, or to go to regular school. All of these kind of things might be laudable, but they're a means of obtaining a goal. They're not the goal. And so a very common problem we see even across organizations is that the means becomes the end. And that is, now having succeeded in obtaining NDIS funding, then we give up on proceeding any further, when in fact the funding was meant to achieve another goal, not to be the goal in itself. I once came across doing an evaluation, and we were in a special school, and there was some conductive education occurring there, PATO, a particular therapeutic approach. And the goal for a particular child was to grip, to learn to grip. And they were doing exercises for gripping, but there was no purpose for the gripping. There was no outcome that the gripping was to be used towards, whether it was to hold on to bike handles or scooter. None of that was mentioned. It was simply that the child learned to grip. And that too is an example of the means becoming the end. And therefore, in a sense, there is no purpose. Stephen Covey years ago wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And the very first habit that he said the successful people had is before you start, have the end in mind. And therefore, what is this end to look like? In our very first session, for instance, we defined service as one or more people doing something beneficial for one or more people. But what's beneficial look like? How do you know when you've achieved a goal that is beneficial for the person? How would you know that? So today we want to have a look at the contribution this concept of the good things of life has towards this idea of a clarity of purpose, where we can then assemble our methods in order to achieve a particular purpose. And we want, of course, the idea that our goal reflects the ability to be able to measure our progress and to know whether we're going in the right direction towards that kind of goal, that it's actually a goal that's doable and achievable, but quite often with much effort, but it's not impossible to achieve. So we want a concept that we can actually obtain and get somewhere with. And of course, we need a kind of concept that allows us to make individual features prevalent in what it is we're doing, to make these ideas speak to each individual person, because our lives aren't identical, but they do have some common features to them. And it's those kind of things that we want to examine today. So in looking at this concept of the good things of life, we want to understand, first of all, what some of the strengths of it are, because the good things of life are really based upon the kind of things that everybody seeks and wants. It's so universal that it's quite often quite common even across cultures. Even though cultures will value different things, there'll be different ideological beliefs, different political beliefs, different religious beliefs. It's still quite common for people over time and throughout history to want many of the same things that we get out of life. In our longer face-to-face workshops, we sometimes do some exercises here where we ask people to write down just 5 things that they want out of life, and then to share that amongst a small group of people. And invariably, there's a lot of commonality across the group, that they just 5 things, they mostly want the same kind of things. And what's interesting is that many of the people in the audience have already experienced gratifying levels of achievement in those things. And sometimes as we go through phases in our life, we're wanting to hang on to those things as well and not let them slip too much. And so we find that the first thing about the good things of life as a concept is that it's consistent with what most people seek, and especially seek within a given culture, because the values tend to be shared amongst that culture. So I have an overhead I want to share with you just here. So we'll just break from my camera and share this with you. We're going to link you or provide for you an article, and it's quoted at the bottom, the Wolfensberger Thomas Caruso article. It's quite short, but it goes into some 17 features of what most people want in life. And what's interesting about this and relevant for our discussion is that when people are devalued, that is, that they're seen as less worthwhile than other people, then they're often denied access to the things that a society values. And therefore, this also becomes a suitable mission for a service to incorporate in its activities, because if they're supporting devalued people, irrespective of the cause of that devaluation, then clearly you're wanting to do something about the problem of access to these very good things. So let's have a look at them briefly. To have a home, to have meaning and purpose in life, to have many valued roles, not just roles, it should be valued roles, to contribute to the lives of other people, very strong one, been found in various studies to be a significant feature, that we get things out of in our own lives when we get to contribute to others, to be as healthy as possible, to be able to work and grow, another feature of contribution, and to learn, to have a good reputation, to have one's image, proper in the eyes of others, to be seen accurately and in a favorable way, to have friends, and especially to have a friend that's ongoing, as you can see lower, a committed friend, you might say to love and to be loved, as the things that we all seek, and to be involved in a range of experiences and take risks and part of that growth, and to have a sense of the future, and to be treated like everybody else. That's a very interesting one, because many people that I've met with disabilities, they often express this in terms of, I just want to be treated like everybody else. And that's what the good things of life as a concept incorporates, that these are experiences we all seek and want as we grow through life. And they're the things that people almost naturally get given when they're valued within a given culture. You tend to be given the things that that culture values. But if you are devalued, you tend to be denied access to those things. Things like education, things like a place to live and have a home with people that you want to live with, the opportunity for growth and learning, the opportunity to contribute to other people, even the opportunity to remain healthy and be as strong as you can be in that physical sense. These are very commonly denied people once they are devalued, and therefore any service stepping out to support people then could look to the good things of life as a broad conceptual concept for supporting the people that they do support, because they're counteracting, they're wanting to act with some actions here that act as an antidote for both being devalued and then experiencing the terrible things that come with being devalued. And if you've not heard of those terrible things, then they're some of the aspects that we go into our longer 2-day workshops, and you'll want to hear about that in the sense that it acts as an impetus for reversing that and preventing that from happening. What's interesting, though, about the good things of life is that it does require effort. You've got to put out effort, and to accomplish this, and especially effort by the person themselves. We often say that it's important that the person grabs the good things of life with both hands. And not everybody, though, who has been devalued and then wounded by the experiences of rejection and isolation and segregation and being limited to have access to these very good things, can sometimes have a dramatic impact on the person, such that they may want to do things that bring further wounding in their life, and may actually be rejecting of the good things of life, at least initially. And therefore, that's a difficult thing, is to sometimes galvanize the effort from someone in order that they might embrace the good things of life once this becomes available to them. And so we'll come back to this problem that sometimes people will make decisions that further wound themselves and increase their vulnerability, part and parcel of having already been wounded. It's a little bit a sense that if you've suffered trauma, you may then want to continue the trauma going. You might do things that exacerbate that situation. But we do know that with proper effort of the person and those who surround them, it is possible. And this is very good news for teams as well, is that even individual workers, perhaps working in isolation from each other, but if they're heading for the same direction, then their various support begins to tie together and there's a consistent direction. In fact, for workers, they can even ask, did I contribute in some way today towards furthering this person's access to the good things of life? And a little later, we'll discuss how to go about that. Of course, as we've mentioned, it reflects then the mission of most services, or could reflect the mission of services, because it counteracts devaluation. And in regard to that, it also allows for a great deal of individualization. And let me just go back out of this now. And sorry. And so as you see that list, you know that the way those things look for you has a real individual flavor to it. And therefore, you'd want to do something then that fulfills that individualization. You know that the more individualized your actions are for the person, then the more relevant it will become for them. And perhaps the more responsive the person will be to those kinds of opportunities that you're providing for them. So what does home look like for this person? What does work look like for this person? What kind of interactions with the community does it look like for this person? And so there's plenty of scope for a discussion here. It says, so what do the good things of life look like for this individual person, and to get a very distinctive individual flavor to that, but one that's still consistent with the broad reality of society. Because if you step outside of that, then it's quite possible the person will start to pursue things that aren't valued, which might only serve to deepen their devaluation. And now that's a bit of a hot topic, of course, that we might go into our discussion, is that what happens when people, as it were, select devalued practices outside of the norm of the culture. But otherwise, but that's still pretty broad. Within our society, lots and lots and lots and lots of things are valued and appropriate and seen in a very positive light. So we don't live in a narrow culture, and there are those as well. Ours is broad and varied. And so what's normal and valued and typical is a huge range of things. And the other feature too is that many of the things that operate in the good things of life are reciprocal benefits that occur. We find that people not only get to receive these things, but they're placed into a position now because they are social. Many of these things have an interactive component to it that means then that there's a reciprocity that occurs. And this is a very good thing for people who might have formerly been devalued, because as a devalued person, you're largely on the receiving end of these experiences. You don't much get to give to other people when you're devalued. We actually don't want want anything from other people when people are devalued. They get given things, but we don't expect much from them. And that's one of the reasons that they're devalued, in a sense. They've got nothing that we want. We don't see them as holding any asset that is desirable. And yet when people receive the good things of life, there is an expectation of reciprocity, of a give and take, and that positions people into the role of being able to contribute. And I've got Hugh Mackay, because he wrote a book called The Good Life that talked about many of the same things that we're here discussing today, and that's a good read. And he talks about where the element of contribution is probably one of the strongest features. And as we know through philosophy and through the ages, that it's kind of more blessed to give than to receive, and that speaks to the benefits that contributing to the lives of others, because you're seen as having an asset that other people need, is a very strong feature of it. The other, an additional aspect, of course, that it's connected to valued social roles. In other words, if you hold valued social roles, then you'll be given things that are concordant with the values that are, or the conditions that are valued within that society. Valued people get given valued things. Devalued people tend to be given devalued things. And now, SRV is just describing this process. It's not saying that's the way it should be, it just says it's the way it is. And therefore, if we want to change that, we have to work within the structures of the way these things work. And that means then that if you want to have access to the good things of life, then you're going to need to get your hands on some valued social roles rather than perhaps the devalued roles that a person's being given. Again, in our longer workshops, we go into quite a bit of detail about the negative roles that devalued people tend to be given. We see them every day in the news and get talked about, but we'll isolate some of those and they'll become more prevalent for you. So there's a key point here of the concept of social role valorization, that where all of this comes from, is that the more roles you hold and the more valued are those roles, the more chance you will be given access to the good things of life, because your status and worth in the eyes of others is largely read from the social roles they perceive you as holding. And if your social roles that you hold are valued, then you're likely then to be given the good things of life. And this is a rather wonderful aspect of the good things of life as a concept, is that they're free. And there isn't a lot of payment necessary. You know, for instance, being loved isn't something we typically pay for. Even the Beatles knew that. They had their song, you know, you can't buy me love, and you certainly can't. Or if you try to do that, it usually devalues that quality. It's not held in quite the same kind of level of attraction as it is when it's given willingly and voluntarily. So you look at that list we looked at earlier, and most of those things are given to us without any sense of coercion. They're given to us because people want to give us those things. They want us to work for them. They want us to be on their team. They want us to be part of their community. They want us as their neighbors. And if you have to coerce that out of people, then it doesn't have quite the same standing to it. So this is why status is so important, our perception of a person's worth as a human being, because when we see people as having that kind of worth, then we tend to naturally want to give them good things. You see this a little bit strangely, of course, in celebrities and football stars and tennis stars, if we get the tennis players here this year or next year now. And is that we even just would like them to look at us, or we would, you know, Nadal's sweaty shirt that he throws into the crowd, let's grab it and never wash it, or something like that. It's a bit strange because it's like we want to grab a piece of the essence of this highly valued person. And fortunately, we only reserve such behavior for those kind of people. Doing it to each other all the time would be a little bit strange. Whereas we tend to then offer the good things of life, though, for the people that we admire and love and want to be close to and see as like ourselves. And valued roles, in a sense, allows us to see the person as they really are, rather than perhaps other features like a disability or their age or their religion or their ethnic group. those kind of things, where when we devalue people, that's all we see. And then we relegate their status to be very low, and we withhold and we withdraw individually and as a society. No, you're ineligible. Like that family on Christmas Island at the moment, you're ineligible. And we withdraw the good things of life and we remove it from them. So the good things of life has a lot going for it as a concept, because it delivers and it actually can transform a person's life. But there can be some downsides to this if we get our concepts a bit wrong. So there are some misunderstandings and misuses of the good things of life. I just want to cover a few right now. The first is that it's often confused with individualism. And individualism is a strong feature in our current culture, where we might get to do whatever we want. And some of that isn't always particularly good. Like, remember, one or more people doing something beneficial? For one or more people was our definition of service, to be of service, not a disservice. And therefore it's confusing then if people sometimes falsely claim that anything the person chooses is their good life. And that might be the case, indeed, but it might also not be. And it's been clear that some people can choose, as I said, who've been through pretty tough circumstances, can choose to, well, they've internalized their devaluation and therefore deserve that they believe they deserve bad things, and therefore their good life might be misery, might be watching TV all day and never growing. It might be, eating to their heart's content and until it's incredibly dangerous for them. It might, undertaking drug regimes or living on the streets and having sex with anyone they want. It's a life you can choose, but it's not necessarily a good one. And it's not necessarily beneficial in terms of our definition of service. And so be careful that we don't create wiggle room for ourselves in basically not having to provide something that's beneficial, because we've fallen back on this choice idea again, that, well, if he's chosen it, it must be okay. And it's also quite possible to be confused with materialism and to see the good things of life as essentially what you own. And I just want to go back to an overhead here again. And let me say, oh, sorry. And you might be able to see Jeffrey Edelston there with his partner some years ago, Bryn, and when they moved in together, the glamorous life. And in many respects, this is the way our culture tends to talk about the good life. And it's imagining that we'll have a home, we might even have a holiday home by the overlooking the ocean or the mountains, and we'll have plenty of gadgetry and the luxuries and the cars and things like that. And that too often gets spoken of as and referred to as the good life. And because of the West use of that language, we wanted to try and clarify that when we're talking about the good things of life, it's not the same as this. And it's not about, as it were, a decadence that we're referring to. We're talking about the things that are truly good as the good things of life. In fact, when you look at this couple, you might say, well, they had the good life, but they didn't have much of the good things of life, as it turned out, which was a bit sad for them in the end. So we want something that's substantially good and not a proxy for that in the way that materialism might be. Now, occasionally we do come across some people, though, who have an ideological opposition to the proposition, to the idea that in order to get the good things of life, you're going to have to be seen as having status worthy of the good things the culture has to give. And it is bad news that the culture can withdraw that from some people. Again, SRV is just describing that process. It's not saying that it's right, it's just that it is. And that the way around that is to obtain some valued roles. There are people, though, who are quite resistant to the idea that valued roles are necessary to get access to the good things of life. They want, as an ideological position, that you get good access to the good things of life and not have valued roles, which often means that you're not there to contribute. You're not there to hold the valued roles that the culture expects of people, that you can withdraw from that, but still get the good things of life. And SRV's response to that would generally be, well, that's unlikely to happen. That if you hold only devalued roles, you're much more likely to be given devalued experiences and a devalued version of life, not the good things of life. And so there's just potentially disagreement with respect to that. The good things of life then is the goal. It's the end. It's where we're heading, in a sense, and it is the first order goal of social role valorisation. It's the most important thing because, as we said, the good things of life, by definition, are the things that are withheld from people when they're devalued, irrespective of the reason for that devaluation. They don't get given access to it. The second order goal, though, is to do with how we get there, which is to do with obtaining and maintaining valued social roles for people. And so SRV looks at ways for people who've never held valued roles, people who are at risk of losing their valued roles, like elderly people entering nursing homes, trying to remain at home. The maintenance of valued roles is so central then to people maintaining their status in the eyes of others, because that influences the way they are then treated. And if we want people to be embraced and wanted within their community, then being perceived as valued and valuable is going to certainly help that, so that the good things of life then naturally, so to speak, get provided for them. Now, three specific conditions as we finish up, implications for the use of the good things of life as a concept, that goal, that endpoint, that purpose. And purpose is all important and great to come back and review purpose, isn't it? And to be clear about what our purpose is, because over time, in fact, even a short time, we can lose track and go off fulfilling other purposes that we never intended to. The implications of this is that the first one is that it helps to define the goals that programs need to support, and not to support goals that aren't consistent with the good things of life. Some years ago, there was a young girl who was in a group home for homeless kids. She announced to the staff that she was going to go down the street, sell herself for a few hours, get some drugs, and then she might get home later that night. And they said, okay, off you go. And so she came back. It was clear that she'd taken the drugs, but she was losing consciousness when she got home. And she was, well, they were very worried for her, so they reached for the phone to ring the ambulance, and she said, no, I don't want to go to the hospital, don't call the ambulance. So they hung up the phone and she promptly died. Now, in a sense, if you know what the good things of life stands for, then you're not going to fall for those kind of massive errors that lead to people's deaths. You're not going to collude, as it were, with something that's bad for people. You're going to do things that are consistent with a service that's beneficial for people, and not play into those kind of ideological errors. So it helps you establish the goal and what programs will and will not support. A second item here is therefore the question of choices do advocates defend? And they too are having to perceive the sincere needs of a party, whether it's a person or a class of people they're representing, and the choices then that people may make that also either are consistent with the good things of life or are not consistent with the good things of life. And you're under no obligation, I believe, to be supporting people to do ruinous things to themselves. You want that they experience the good things of life, and that too has healing aspects to it. and therefore not to facilitate people adding to the emotional and wounding burden that they're already living under and making things worse. And this is a problem for our culture because choice is one of the things we highly applaud. In fact, we virtually worship it. And that's why it can, in our minds, trump every other consideration, as though, well, you know, you can die with your rights on because it's your choice to make these things, as opposed to saying, how could we help facilitate this person to exercise their autonomy and rights beneficially and in the right way? We also know too that when people don't have valued roles, they actually don't have many choices. Valued roles bring you into a context where now I've got many choices to make and decisions to consider and preferences to explore. But if I have very few valued roles, then almost everything is shut down for me anyway. And therefore this becomes another, the choice talk becomes another facade. An image that is created that sounds virtuous, but actually may be destructive to people's well-being. Our final one is that also the way agencies and programs relate to families with regard to this question of the good things of life. We want that people and their families get to interact and express the kind of preferences and hopes and dreams, in fact, their hopes and dreams for the good things of life for their son and daughter, and that as a partnership with their agency, they might get to discuss that. Quite often, though, these relationships are fraught. And what is often the case is that they're coming into the discussion from very different directions. For instance, there may be some families that want to keep their son and daughter in a group home that could live in a much less restricted environment. It or could be the other way around, a very conservative agency that's willing to try new things for a son and daughter. A school, for instance, that won't consider that this child should be with the other kids and not segregated or isolated from them. And therefore there's a big difference then in how they perceive the purpose of what it is they're doing. We have found, though, that if there can be agreement around the good things of life, that is that both parties want things that are in unison together, then they're on the same page together. And the agency's capacity to communicate that to their staff is also going to be tremendously enhanced, with the staff able again to consider and measure their progress against the good things of life ideas for the person that they're supporting. It's interesting how teams love and flourish with a clear purpose, and the good things of life provides that. The other thing that teams flourish in is the fact that it's an elevated goal. It's not easy to achieve it, but if we put in the effort, then we will. So this isn't a false hope. People with disabilities and their families are being given false hopes over a long, long time in history of things that will never occur. And even political parties sometimes promise things that end up being a false hope. We put our effort into this and it was a dream, but the good things of life isn't. It's a reality for so many of us, and for so many that we also know where it is not the case that they experience these things, but they could if we can get our collective act together. So a bit of work there in bringing families and agencies together on the same page to reflect upon what does the good things of life look like for this person? What would they be doing? Where would they live? Who would they know them? What roles would they have? In what ways would they be growing and developing? And if we can begin to agree on that and not be at loggerheads and cross purposes, where one party is looking to head into the community and the other party is looking for a group home that essentially locks them up, then you're never going to get agreement and a kind of right relationship occurring out of that, that dissent. So let's stop there, Rhiannon and Rosita, and see if there are any questions. Oh, we've got our second poll. Having covered that, there's many more things we could say, but we've got 40 minutes thereabouts. Let's see, do the next poll and then and have some question and answer, and we'll go from there.
If you'd like to bring that up. Just a bit of technology. We haven't had any questions, but I might allow, Okay, here's the poll. So then our second poll is, has this session given you an added appreciation that you can implement as you support someone? So it's simple yes or no. Give people a few more seconds. Okay, might share those results. Excellent. Well, 100% has said that this session has given them an added appreciation. I certainly appreciated it. You know, it's just such an important reminder.
Perhaps I could do some advertising, Rhiannon, while people are gathering any
that would be great.
questions. Just to let you know, we have, as Rhiannon signaled earlier, some social role valorisation events coming up. We call Towards the Good Things of Life. No, Towards a Better Life, we call the workshop, but we discuss the good things of life in it, but many other things, including how you can support people to hold valued social roles, which is that vehicle to the things of life. They marry together. The two-day SRV event is being held in Sydney on the 16th and 17th of February next year. And immediately after that, on the 18th of February, we're holding a one-day event on what it means to have an intellectual impairment. So that's a workshop that looks at very practical things about how to help people be at best advantage as they interact with their world, the difficulties that people typically face, and then how to accommodate that and help people flourish and thrive. We're also holding the two-day SRV event in Canberra on the 22nd and 23rd of February, and Imagine More is the sponsor for that. So go to imaginemore.com.au for details about that two-day event in Canberra. In Wodonga, we now have a new workshop in Wodonga. They're still discussing, is it a one or a two-day version, but that'll be either the 1st or 2nd of March. And Tony is the one to contact for that. I should have brought her details. I might pass that on to Rosita so that she can forward that on in the after workshop communication that she'll have with you. And Melbourne is on the 9th and 10th of March through Belonging Matters. So a whole series of workshops for you if you're on the East Coast here. Although I know some of you are international as well watching in. Don't forget to look up the website, johnarmstrong.media, just John Armstrong, one word, .media. There's 10 programs like we saw today, a bit longer, and overheads, handouts, questionnaires, extra reading, and families and agencies are using this as a means of training their staff in the better support of people. 22 hours in total, and you get that under license for 12 months that you can then share with all of your staff and give them direct access to it, and use that as a basis of your discussion then about how do we apply these principles. People, wanted to let you know too about the new book out on aging and the good things of life, the application of social role valorisation to supporting people as they age. That is hot off the press, and chock-a-block's a pretty thick book, lots of readings and chapters, including 3 chapters by the late Dr. Wolf Wolfensberger that have yet unpublished and have so now available. So that's world experts in aging, and come out just in time for the Aged Care Commission that is still conducting their work and hearings and highlighting the problems that we've seen emerge. So that's a great text you can get from the Community Resource Unit in Brisbane or Belonging Matters, belongingmatters.org.au in Melbourne, or CRU, C-R-U, crew.org.au. And you can pick up about $37 posted to you. I think that's all the ads.
Yeah. And we've had it's not really a question, but someone has just, acknowledged that they're very pleased to hear you speak about choice and how some advocates and services hide behind the person's choice.
Yeah, it's a big topic. In fact, it's one of the programs on the website. There is also a small, shorter version on it, I think, on the Family Advocacy website, though I went looking for it last night and couldn't find it, but I think it's there somewhere, where they recorded a session I do about how to support people's choices in this way. But there is that problem that we feel that we have to affirm people in everything these days. And in some certain areas, it's an almost explicit law that you have to affirm people and go along with things, irrespective of how dangerous it is. Fortunately, there's still some areas where you are allowed to say, I don't think this is a good idea. If a son or daughter, for instance, is experiencing anorexia, you're usually expected to help them get through that, not to affirm them and say, oh, I'm really glad you're trying to starve yourself. Let me help you. That would seem ridiculous. But there are other contexts where we're kind of forced to do the very same thing. In this context, we're saying that there is a type of choice that we're responsible to support, and ones where we might not. Now, it doesn't mean that we just ignore or crush the person, though. We have to work with this, but it doesn't either mean that we are compelled to have to do and arrange for something that we know is detrimental to the person's well-being. So we are having to make some judgments here. This is especially true for people when competency is impaired. And some of you are working and supporting people with competency impairments, but sometimes it's like you pretend that that's not the case and prepared to go along with anything. And if I'm a service, then my role is to be beneficial. And I'm not going to be involved, and I'm not going to ask my staff to be involved in anything that isn't beneficial. Otherwise, I'm also putting my staff at risk by having to do things with people that is also going to erode their conscience. Like fancy asking staff to work with someone in a way that wastes their life, because that wastes the staff member's life as well. I've heard of NDIS plans where people are literally being given funding to watch TV all day with a staff member on the lounge. And it blows my mind to think that that kind of thing gets approval. And I wonder what taxpayers would think about it too. I think even taxpayers want to know that their funds are being used to further people's well-being, not to undermine it. And in a sense, devalue people. We devalue people through the way we treat them. And therefore supporting choices that are bad for them is to further devalue them, for them to be injured by those kind of experiences. And clearly being around valued people too that make good choices helps people to think, well, I have other options available to me. And so in our longer events, we explore the kind of things that influence people, that assist them to learn to make and to make better choices. And so you have a look for that if that's what, and we also discuss this in the 2-day event coming up. We have a whole section that deals with choice and what we call first and second order preferences, and how to support people in those ways.
And so, John, we've got another, very similar. Someone's asked, in terms of trying to support people to live the good life and maintain value goals, how would you go about talking with someone you support who may be engaging in devalued things, for example, drugs, gambling, addiction? That is not a valued choice.
That's right. It's there are questions that are fraught with problems. Of course, the first one is to do with that peer group. We tend to follow what our peer group is doing. Many devalued people have been placed with other devalued people, so they'll tend to follow the same kind of patterns. And we know that people's behavior changes according to who people are with. Of course, if things are very bad, if people are making choices that are so destructive to their well-being, sometimes an individual person is well out of their depth, or even a single agency, to do very much about that. And to take, as it were, unilateral action to stop someone, unless, of course, what they're wanting to do is either illegal or just so very destructive. So quite often that's where our statutory authorities come into play as well. and that, as it were, through a proper process, should this person's freedoms be limited until such time. And they're extreme, but occasionally they do occur, and it does tell us that you know, we too have to be careful by any restrictive structures we put, and all the departments in the NDIS have restrictive practices, guidelines now about how not to do that, or to go through a proper process if some degree of supportive or short-term restriction is to be applied. We've seen stuff about the medications or the drugs that people are put on, often for the welfare or well-being of staff, you know, to drug people at night so they sleep longer, so the sleepover isn't woken up, and illegitimate reasons like that. And so quite a lot of the restrictive practices legislation tries to handle those kind of unwarranted restrictions. So you can get violation here from multiple sources. So then, of course, there's the reinforcement. Do people ever have an opportunity for feedback about the choices they're making as well? Quite often staff feel illegitimate, or they don't want to impose their values by giving even an opinion. For instance, someone might come out dressed for the day, but dressed in a way that doesn't look appealing, doesn't even look adult, doesn't make the person look competent, and everything is just wrong. And while they're free to do that, you know that the load this puts on that person's reputation, they're not in a good position to bear. And so some feedback might be warranted, and say, didn't you say you wanted to be treated as an adult? I don't think it's going to work today. Do you want to look in the cupboard and we see if something matches? You know, my wife says this to me all the time, actually. And, you know, it's like, I'm not going out with you looking like that, you know. And sometimes our feedback to each other is quite direct. But when we support supporting people, we often feel very reluctant to give people that kind of feedback, but it's just the thing they need, of people wandering out into the community and they don't know the effect they're going to have, and no one's ever told them. It's hardly fair, it hardly values them, putting them in such a situation where others are going to perhaps snicker and laugh at the person or reinforce a negative stereotype about them. And so the least we can do is give people that feedback, culturally embedded, non-coercive feedback. They still can reject that and say, I don't care, they can all go to Billio. But at least we've given a person a chance to think about, do I want to look better? And most people do. They may not have realized that that shirt doesn't go with those pants. Do you want to look in the cupboard and we find something else? And so those three things are things we do with each other, which is interesting as well. And although not so much the last one about the, you know, statutory bodies to limit a person's freedom in a short-term way, but the first two things to do with the peer group, who you're with, and then the feedback that they provide, they're very powerful socio-behavioral mechanisms that we all alter our behavior because we want to fit in, we want to get along with other people. And it's those kind of things that have often been limited in the experience of many devalued people. They've never had that kind of feedback, and staff are often quite reluctant to provide it. And where else are they going to get it? And yeah.
And often, John, you find that people over time, if they're in more positive valued roles, the roles that perhaps were devalued go away because, you know, again, they're getting the indicators, I'm in the role, and they're experiencing what, you know, belonging and connection with people. So, you know, it takes time. But I've definitely, in my sister's life, who has an intellectual disability, seeing her, some of the more negative type of roles that she may have had have slowly, definitely the bricks have come down over the years because she's in that positive role.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because the role may not be clear as a concept for the person until they've experienced it. And then all the benefits that flow from it, virtually naturally, which is why valued roles is the highest goal underneath the good things of life. Where's our... So the good things of life being the first order goal, but the second order goal is valued social roles, because there's a feedback loop between them here. The more roles you get, the more life you get. And then to experience that, and I've met people who've come out of institutions, and the idea that they might be sent back there just horrifies them, because they're having such a good time now that they're in the community, and the sense of freedom that they've obtained and the growth and opportunities. There's no going back to the old days. And quite vehement about that. So they're embracing the good things of life, as we say, with both hands. And man, you're cooking with gas when you see that, when people embrace that. This is what life is like. Because, you know, for many of those decades, they've never, ever experienced that before. And still, though, we still have so many people where even a friend, freely given a relationship, even a single one, is outside of their experience. And they don't know how to handle friendship in a way, because they've only ever had people paid to be with them, which is how devalued they are. People have to be paid to be with you. And no one would do that voluntarily. Well, we have to position people where that is now a reality. We begin to see it. In fact, today, I think, is the day of people with disabilities around the world. And I heard Kurt Fernley talking about these very things, that we've got the NDIS and how fantastic that is, but people still aren't getting a life living like other people. They're not getting the jobs, they're not getting the relationships, they're not in their own home. And so there's still a long way to go. And that's what the good things of life pictures. It's a vision that can be real. That's what I love about it. It's not a false hope that we're giving people. Go for this, even though it's unobtainable. The good things of life is something that can be truly experienced, as long as we get these building blocks in place and use our effort.
Excellent. Thanks, John. I think we're out of time now. So thanks again for everyone for joining today's webinar and the three. This is our last, but we will be making these available online, and please do share. And thanks again for all your support.
Lovely. Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.